This is the first video in the Filterverse from the ground up series. In this series, we are going to be going over a bunch of techniques for Filterverse, and it's meant to start out at the beginning with knowing very little about filters. You don't even know what a filter is. We're going to be covering that. And then building up to more and more complex techniques. There are a lot of modules in here that can sound pretty amazing, but if you have no idea what to expect when you turn something or what knobs to grab, what the hot ones are that are going to be really cool to mess with, it can be really hard to know when to grab the plugin. And so we're going to try and give you a bunch of techniques so that becomes a lot easier. So let's start off with the first one, the Swiss Army knife. The Swiss Army knife filter is close to a standard filter. It's actually still fancier than a basic filter. It's what's called a state variable filter. And that means that it can move smoothly between different filter types. So right here we have what's called the cutoff. The cutoff, as you can see visualized, allows and controls what frequencies are in the pass band. So this band that's shown here, if you imagine this is like low frequency and this is high frequency, this band shows what frequencies will be allowed through. It's referred to as a pass band, and the area where things are not allowed through is referred to as a stop band. And then this area that we have for transition is going to be our transition band. I'm actually not sure if transition band's like an official term, but stop band and pass band are terms I use regularly in electrical engineering. It's actually a pretty common thing. So I have here this drum loop, and right now we are on what is called a low pass filter. It lets low frequencies pass. So if we move this, here only the low frequencies get through. Now you'll notice this transition band, it has some amount of time before it starts really turning down. And with filters, they have what are called poles. These terms come from math, which is why they're called that way. You can actually map this whole thing out on a complex circle and use math to move points around on a circle. And it's this crazy thing where you look at the magnitude of lines. Whatever, all you need to know is that the word pole determines how quickly it turns down at this cutoff point. So right now it's turning down, not super fast. Right now we have 2 poles. So each pole is worth 6 decibels. And as we go up to 4, you get a steeper cutoff. And this is going to be a 24 dB per octave roll off. So what that means is every time this cutoff doubles in frequency. So right now we're at 120. So that means that by the time we get to 240 on this graph, it's going to be down 24 dB. It's going to be down further. If we take it to 2 at 240, it's only going to be down 12 dB because it's only got 2 poles. You're going to hear this pole term a lot with a lot of types of filters, and that's all it's referring to. It comes from math if you really want to get into the weeds with it, but all you need to know is how it sounds. So if we bring this up and I move it down with a 2-pole low pass filter, this is the sound we have. Just like that. Stop somewhere in the middle. You can hear how it's kind of muffled. Bring it up. So if we bring it down to 4 and we do that same motion, it's a lot quieter at the low end. And you can hear we cut the highs faster as we move. Now, which one you pick is going to be dependent on the material you're working with. And in general, when it moves, the number of poles will induce what's called a phase shift, which is another small difference. The way filters actually do their filtering is through essentially a series of extremely rapid delays. And when I say delay, I'm talking like a single sample, 5 samples. A delay is so small, you would never hear it as a delay. But what winds up happening is it manifests as this filter. And so when you do delays, though, you can introduce some phase shift. And there are ways of combating this phase shift, but you need to be aware that the steeper the cutoff is, In general, this means you're going to have a bigger phase shift. And so sometimes this can be something we try to do on purpose to get a certain sound. And if you want a very, very, very sharp filter, you're going to need a big, big, big phase shift there. So anyways, that's the low pass filter. That's what it sounds like. Let's go up to the next one, the high pass. I'm skipping all these in the middle for the moment. So the high pass is just the opposite. It lets high frequencies pass. Sometimes it's referred to as a low cut because the stop band is in the low frequencies. So if we start at the low end and open it up, the low frequencies go away. So if you're mixing and you hear rumble on a mic, you can add a low pass filter to try and get rid of that low end rumble. So that is the high pass and the low pass. Now this filter is a state variable filter, so it can continuously change between these different filter types. There are filters that are just a low pass or just a high pass. This just makes it a little bit more usable in terms of, you get a lot more flexibility out of having more types of filters. The next one is a band reject filter. And this is a band that they're also called band stop filters or notch filters. And this is a band that will literally just create a hole in the spectrum wherever it's at. And this is a good point for me to talk about the cutoff a little bit more. This cutoff knob you'll see on almost every filter. And what a cutoff means is that's where it begins to cut the signal. Technically, the cutoff is defined by wherever the signal decreases by 3 dB. Traditionally, that's usually what it's done. So if they're starting to turn down, once it hits and it's decreased by 3 decibels, that's going to be the cutoff. So it can vary what this word kind of means based on the type of filter. So right, in a band reject filter, the cutoff is actually referring to the center frequency that's moving around. So if we move this, you'll hear this little hole in the spectrum. And I deliberately don't have a spectrogram on the screen. I want you to use your ears. I encourage you to listen with headphones. It is critical that you gain an understanding of what these things sound like. You are going to have a way easier time sound designing if you have an expectation of what they're going to sound like. They just don't help your hearing grow as fast as it could. So use your ears. This is what it sounds like. You hear that whoosh, almost wishing sound? That's the sound of what we're going to later realize is phasing. You're going to find that the more complex filters are like groups of these ideas. So this one has 2 pass bands in one reject band, hence why it's called band reject. It also kind of looks like a notch, so that's why it's called a notch filter by some, and it has a stop band right there, so sometimes it's called a band stop filter. You'll see all these names used in different synthesizers, different manuals, but they all mean the same thing. Up next, we have the bandpass filter, and the bandpass filter is just the opposite of the band reject. Here we had a pass band, a rejection band, and a pass band. Well, now we've got a rejection band, a pass band, and a rejection band. And we could see sort of as we move it, we only hear what's in that band. It's the band pass, the stuff that's allowed through. So you move it down, move it up. Now, there are several ways to make a bandpass filter, and right now we have a singular cutoff knob that controls the center frequency. If we wanted to make it a more narrow bandpass, we need to change the poles of the filter to make it more narrow. So if we make the poles different, we see that at a higher poles, we get more rejection because the slope changes. And so this is a more narrow band. You can hear a lot more isolation now. When we go down, we don't hear the hi-hats, but at the lower one, you hear the hats bleed through. This is why you might pick one or the other. But again, you're making trade-offs occasionally by doing this. Like there could be phase shifts or stuff going on based on how the filter works. Now, the bandpass filter can also commonly be implemented, if we go to another one, by combining a low pass and a high pass together. So let's bypass this one and turn these two on. So, and we just click the numbers in order to turn it on. So wherever these two overlap, where their pass bands overlap, is going to be the region that allows the frequencies to go through. If we make these a little bit tighter on each one by increasing their poles, you should have an expectation of sort of what this is doing now, and we move them. We could see, oh, if we have this, well, there's not very much overlap between the two filters, which is why we don't hear much. Bring this one down, bring this one up. So you have this region of overlap. This is also a common way to do it. And this one has a couple of advantages. You get two cutoff controls. So you can have sort of asymmetric bandpass moves, and you get separate resonance controls, which we'll dive into resonance here in a little bit. Up next, we have the peaking filter. Now, the peaking filter is kind of interesting because it doesn't look like much is going on here. And that's because it creates a center frequency with a resonance. And there's a boost at wherever the cutoff is at frequency-wise. And you can normally, in an EQ, peaking filters are very commonplace, and they give you the ability to boost or to cut. But here, we really only have the ability to boost through this thing called resonance. We're going to dive into resonance here in a second, but if I just move it around, you can kind of get the vibe for what this sort of a peaking filter would give you. Have it less intense. Change the poles. Generally, also, if you're grabbing a peaking filter in this case, you actually intend to use a filter to make some frequencies louder, not softer. And you're going to find that we actually are going to want to do this on the other ones as well quite often. Filters don't just remove frequencies, they can also turn some frequencies up. So let's talk about this resonance thing now. So all resonance means is that there is a boost in wherever the cutoff is at. So if I move it down and then I give it some resonance, we're going to have a boost there. And you see it manifested as this. Now, whenever you highly boost a narrow band of frequencies, and you'll hear me refer to things as bands. I almost never say a singular frequency, because a singular frequency is basically a really narrow band. Normally we talk of frequency bands, like this is the band of frequencies, but in a very narrow region, we have an extremely high boost. This is resonance, and it resonates at that frequency. It's going to make that frequency way louder. And when you boost a narrow band like this, basically a singular frequency, you'll hear it ring out as a sine wave, because that's essentially what it is. Sometimes when you're working with recorded audio, you'll actually sweep the frequency looking for areas that stick out more when boosted compared to other areas. And you'll turn those down because those frequencies in that recording are already naturally resonating, and you want to balance them back a little bit. A lot of EQs now have freeze functions that actually will stop the spectrum and look at it and tell you the ones that are the loudest. But, doing it by ear, trust your ears. Be wary of anything that is a totally visual workflow. So, okay, bringing this down, we have all these different types. We have resonance. Resonance has another secret ability that is sometimes possible on different filter types. And that is they can boost a frequency so much that they themselves begin to resonate at that frequency. It's called self-oscillation. And what it means is, we're at 150 hertz. If we push this past 10, and not every filter is capable of doing this, it is something that has to be designed in. What it means is when it plays a sound, it boosts it so much that even after the sound is gone, it has enough to continue resonating at that frequency. And then as we move the cutoff around, we can get that sound. So if we play it, if I hit stop, it's still resonating. And it's resonating at the cutoff because the resonance has been driven high. We back the resonance off, that goes away. So this can be a really fun concept to mess with. Generally, you don't dive into self-resonance without some sort of a really wacky idea in mind. Usually you're going to want to stay below those values, but you'll see cases where it can be really cool to bring up, perhaps with a modulation source, which we'll get into adding modulation sources later as we go along. So at this point, we should have an understanding of the different filter types, what they sound like, what they're going to do to the sound, why they do the thing that they do. So we should be able to have some sort of a picture of what the sound will be like. In fact, I encourage you to set your frequency control somewhere, set a resonance value, and then predict, oh, how's this going to sound? And do it on a drum loop, because you could say, how much of the hi-hat am I going to hear? How much of the snare am I going to hear? How much of the, if you have toms, am I going to hear the toms? Am I going to hear the kick? Like over here, we'll actually still hear the hat pretty well. Even down here, it looks pretty low, but this is a long band. We'll probably still hear the hi-hat if we play this. It's in there. But if we increase the poles to 4, this should take care of the hi-hats for the most part. They're gone, basically. So that's the kind of expectation you should really be looking to develop when you move it around. When you give it a resonance, how are you going to hear this? Is it going to be really peaky? Or just going to be a little bit? And you're going to learn that there are all these different ways to implement a low pass or a high pass. This is just one of the ways, and they all have their own sound to them. Move it around. Boost it more. Boost it less with the resonance. Now, the last control we have here, drive, it can be trickier to predict if you're unfamiliar with the specific drive. There's saturation, drive, distortion, crunch, squash. There's so many words to describe what this could potentially be doing. There's a lot of algorithms. There's a lot of views on it. In general, for this particular one, it's pushing it closer and closer so that the smooth edges of the waveform get ran into a threshold, meaning they cut off quicker, and this introduces higher harmonics into the sound. And really, the best way to learn how these are going to sound is just to turn them up and listen. So let's do that. So right now we have very little resonance and a lower cutoff. Let's hear it. Now if we give it some resonance. Yeah. So in general, I probably wouldn't use drive on this sound, but drive can have some really cool properties in sound design. You'll see it come up from time to time, and you'll often see me actually avoid it if I have a sound that highly relies on resonance, because it de-emphasizes the resonance and it can just take away all the magic you're getting from that. You'll get a feel for the drive control as you use it sonically. Again, there's pretty wide variation between different distortions. And you'll see when I choose to grab it, when I avoid it. I almost always try it out just to see, because sometimes I'm surprised. But again, if you're using it on a sound with a lot of resonance, probably not going to want it. Now, I didn't mention this little stop button here that is pretty handy to know about. If you are self-oscillating and you want it to stop, you can hit this, and that makes it go away. So you're going to want to know about that. Now, the thing is, if you have multiple filters with stuff on them, you may need to hunt the particular filter down that's doing it. But yeah, you're definitely going to want to know about that. All right, so let's talk about a pretty basic intro effect that's kind of cool. We are going to use a low pass with a low resonance in a high pole value, meaning the poles, it's going to have a steeper slope. This is referred to as the slope. It's the slope of a line. And so this is it. In this case, it's this up and down is decibels, and left to right is frequency. So it's in dB per octave. You're going to hear it referred to as that. And every pole you get gives you an extra 6 dB. So this is a 24 dB per octave filter, referred to as a sharper filter. There are sharper ones, but this one, is decently sharp. And we are going to have this one start low. And so this is going to start out with very little let through. Then we're going to grab a second filter and turn it on, and we're going to make it a high pass. Now we need to understand how this is flowing. So right now we are in what's called serial flow. or serial signal flow. And so filter 1, its output, which is basically nothing right now, is going to feed into filter 2. And we're going to make this high and give it a high pull, meaning a steeper cutoff. So it is basically nothing as well. And so right now they don't let anything through. And then as the song progresses, we're going to open these up and it's going to reveal stuff through a band pass. And they're going to open up in 2 different directions, revealing a little narrow spectrum when they begin to cross. And as they finish crossing, they'll completely open up and let everything through, right? This one's going to go all the way down. This one's going to go all the way up. So I want you to visualize in your mind, or it's not visual for hearing, hearerize. I want you to hear it in your head. Guess what this is going to sound like? Have a picture. Now, to set this up, it would be nice if we had one control to do that. So I'm going to introduce you a little bit to the modulation. So down here is the modulation area. I'm going to turn one of these modules on, and we're going to use a meta knob for this. There's a bunch of controls in here. We're going to focus on the meta knob to begin. So this knob can be used to control multiple things at once so that we don't have to like turn this one and then go turn this one. Or if you're familiar with automation, we don't have to automate both of them. Automation is going to always provide you with the most control, by the way, when it comes to really specific moves like this. But I would like this control to start moving up when this moves up. And I want this control to start moving down when this moves up. So the way we're going to do this is you'll notice these little 3 lines under different controls. And these lines mean that that parameter can be modulated. So if we click this and we can modulate it positively, or you can modulate it negatively. And so what this means is if we make it positive, when this control goes up, this control goes up, which is exactly what we want for this knob. And if we take a look, it moves and we can see the visual here. And we can see now our 3 bars have now been 1 bar that's red so that we know, oh, these are touching each other. Now, if we go to the second filter, we would also like to modulate this. But look at this. If we do the same thing and we use our meta knob, that's what this is called. We turn this up. If we turn this, nothing happens. And that's because it's trying to go from the maximum value to a maximer value. It just doesn't exist. So we want this one to actually be negative. When this goes up, we want this to go down. And as we move this, it moves it down. So now we have a single control that does both moves. And again, I want you to really quick visualize what is it going to sound like on the drums. How quickly will you hear the low end of the kick? How quickly will you hear the snare? How much will you hear the hats? Will you hear the hats at the same time as the snare? How thin will the sound be? I want you to sort of have an expectation of what this is going to do. And so let's go ahead and move it and find out. That's what it sounds like. Bring it back. Now that was with very steep filters. If we go ahead and take them both back to 2, so now the overlap will happen a little bit quicker. Imagine what that would sound like. Let's see. So it's kind of interesting, like, you know, it's like, okay, it's kind of like a volume control. It's a little bit fancier than a volume, I suppose. Let's take it one step more. Let's give each one some resonance. And I'm going to go up to around 8. So a pretty decent amount of resonance. And this time I'll stay on this page to watch it. And let's go ahead and move this. And I want you to picture, how is this going to sound? Is it going to be different? Let's find out. Well, it's going to be different, but how? Let's hear it. Pretty dang cool. Now let's say also as this moves, right, when they both overlap, they have a pretty big boost. And then we hear those 2 boosts happen as they move away. This is something, for example, you would not be able to do with the regular bandpass approach, having 2 filters to do this. It's a unique effect you can do with that. I've heard this on a ton of song intros, by the way. Anytime you're introducing an element and you want it to fade in, this is kind of a cool way to bring an element in. Now, it might have been a bit much. Maybe we reduce them down to 4 and we hear what that sounds like. That's kind of a cool way to do it. It's a little bit more tasteful, I think, not so on the nose. It's going to depend on your sounds, of course. Now, it would be kind of cool if we could go for a higher amount of resonance, and then we could back that resonance off as the knob moves. So we could link that to this knob as well. They have the 3 lines. So if we click, we could say, hey, we want this knob to turn down when this knob turns up. So we're going to give it some modulation depth, but we don't want a ton, just a little. So it'll start moving down as we move it. And I recommend let's have our knob set high so we can see exactly how much. So now when we move it, we can see the amount that's sort of the maximum amount of reduction. So we'll have it end around 4, just like where we were before. And maybe on this one, we actually have it end around 2. We have it end a little bit differently. Again, negative because we want it to move down. So now when we move it, this is the effect we have. We could be a little bit more crazy when the filters meet, and then, you know, it'll relax out when the things are completely open. Pretty nice. And you get a little bit more of that peaking sound right at the beginning. In fact, we could afford to get a little bit crazier and it would still work out. Now you can mess with poles, you can make the filters different, you could experiment with drive. And again, these have the lines, you can augment them with the lines. So I encourage you, get a drum loop, try this out, set this up, listen to it, think, how is this gonna sound? Think, oh, okay, these are the 2. What if you were to toss a band reject filter into the mix? You give it a larger pole value. Now, the reject filters are going to behave a little bit differently. So I encourage you to just listen to how they sound and then say, oh, we want this filter to start high and move down as well. And so we're going to have this one and it'll move down as well. Now, of course, these 2 are going to be filtering out most of the sound. So this won't matter until these 2 actually start letting some of the sound through. And this is where understanding what these are going to let through and how they sound will let you know if what you're doing at the end of the chain is actually going to do anything. Because sometimes you set up a thing and you don't realize it, but there's nothing there until way later down the line. And so this really doesn't do much. Let's go ahead, let's turn it on and let's hear this. You know, so we started high, we went down that time. Let's give it some resonance. We're right there on the self-oscillation threshold. You could even do things that are a little crazier. Like, for example, what if you had a bandpass filter that started somewhere in the middle? Let's take the drive away and the number of pulls away and move the meta knob so it starts out here. And then maybe over time, it transitions to, where are we at the top? A high pass filter, so that it lets everything through and it brings the resonance down. Like, what would that shape sound like? What kind of fade in would that be? There's a lot here. There's a reason it's called the Swiss Army knife. It's kind of a clever name to stay away from the variable filter thing, because a lot of plugins have a state variable filter. Many filters though only have they go from low pass to band pass to high pass. They skip peaking and band reject. So it's kind of cool to have these in the mix as part of the transition. And if you're looking to pick up Filterverse, there is a link down below where you can go and get it. Subscribe and hit that bell icon for future videos, and have a blessed day.